I'm Charlie Bright of Gold Derby, and I'm joined on this Meet the Experts panel for documentary and nonfiction programming by Alan V. Farrow co-director Kirby Dick, Boys State co-director Amanda McBaine, City So Real director Steve James, The Social Dilemma director Jeff Orlowski, and RuPaul's Drag Race producer Tom Campbell. Steve, I want to direct this first question to you, and and then open it up to the group. What are some of the documentary or nonfiction pieces of entertainment that you found influential in making you want to work in that specific field?
Well, one of them for sure, which in an interesting way has a direct influence on this particular docuseries, City So Real, was Chris Marker's Le Jolie Mai. I saw that back when I was in grad school, and it was one of the films that made me want to make documentaries because it just seemed like anything was possible in a documentary when I looked at that film. And that film has stuck with me all these years. And, you know, after I'd been in Chicago for a while, I thought maybe I could attempt to do something in that vein, although, you know, he's a poet of the cinema. So, but certainly Le Jolie Mai was one for me.
Yeah, well, for me, you know, it was the Cinema Verite filmmakers. I was sort of struck by their approach, and you know, kind of a shift from what had been happening before. Of course, once you get into making documentaries, you know, the purity of that ideal, which is always interesting. It's always great to have an ideal and, you know, to be working up against it. But what I found as soon as I got in, that you know, there was no such thing as just being not involved in the production. And that was one of the reasons that I continued being a filmmaker, was because I just found, you know, the interaction between being a filmmaker and the subject matter, it was so rich, it was so intense, everybody was influencing everybody. It's kind of this interesting, very kind of unusual kind of collaboration that's completely unpredictable. And that's kind of, I think, why probably all of us love it.
I have another answer because I make a very different kind of show than you guys do. My influences, I mentioned some before, but were like growing up as a queer kid with no queer television, you had to sort of read the tea leaves. So things like Match Game with Charles Nelson Riley and Brett Summers were kind of the original Will and Grace. And I know it sounds, and there was lots of double entendre, and you had to sort of, as a queer kid, you had to kind of live with like 2 or 3 different scripts in your head, depending on who you were around or what you're trying to convince. And also the Carol Burnett show would end with like a big musical number parody, you know, Mildred Fierce or whatever for Mildred Pierce. All these things we do on Drag Race now. And even the Cher show, which I mean, it's fun of Cher, but like it was about beauty and, you know, Bob Mackie, who's a queer legend and design legend in general. But it was funny, but without knowing it, that's, again, that weird thing you find out when you find your tribe after leaving, in my case, my small town, that we were all kind of, it depends on our age, and I'm showing mine, but all these little things that we watched and thrilled in, that is part of the, I don't know, the everything bagel that is Drag Race.
That's great.
Amanda, you want to jump in next? Yeah.
It's embarrassing and silly that I'm embarrassed to say this, but in 1994, obviously, Hoop Dreams and also the War Room, those were right at the moment that I was graduating college, and like, what am I going to do with, I don't know what skills I have in this universe. And anyway, both Jesse and I, my co-director and also my husband, those films hit us in the perfect moment in our lives, but also because they're just fantastic films. So thank you, Steve. Again, I've said this to you before, but I feel like I have to say it every time I see you. I get a little bit flushed. But I think those films also were meaningful for this particular film too, as far as references in thinking about going into shooting Boys State. So.
Awesome, love that. I would like to share 2 references for me. When I was going into college and I saw Baraka for the first time, and Baraka just blew my mind for what you could do with the camera and what cinema could do, and completely fell in love with that film. And I think that played a huge influence on Chasing Ice and Chasing Coral, those environmental projects. But then an influence that I think really shaped The Social Dilemma in many ways. I've just always been a huge fan of Errol Morris's work, and The Fog of War and The Thin Blue Line, just to be able to like investigate something so deeply and try to like distill down to the essence of a subject matter. I feel like that's very much what we tried to do with The Social Dilemma, to drill into like, what is this stuff doing to us and to society and to civilization. So it took a lot of influences from Errol there.
So I'm going to pose this next question to to you, Jeff. What are some, we've all been, I think a lot of people have been absorbing a lot more documentary and nonfiction programming, especially with the pandemic over the last year and a half. What was the last piece of nonfiction that really left a huge imprint on you?
Oh my goodness, great question. Nonfiction film or nonfiction in general?
Does nonfiction film or television? We're not interested in books.
I know. I've got like a stack of. I feel like my mind immediately went to this like huge library of things I'm trying to read right now. It's hard to answer explicitly. I think that one of the things that I just love about the doc community and about film festivals, and I feel such a huge lack of the festival community in my life right now, is the ability to go and see countless amazing films with your friends and peers on a every month or two basis, and to be able to be blown away. So in some ways, I feel like as a result of COVID, like that huge part of my life and the being gone for the last year has been a real palpable loss. But actually, I did just get to attend a film festival in person just recently. Luisa Hoyos' latest film, I got to see a screening of that at the Boulder Film Festival, called Mission Joy, and just like a beautiful portrait of the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, and these two brilliant thinkers and inspirations engaging in conversation. And that was like the first film I saw in a theater in a year and a half.
I'll jump in. There's so much great work being done. So to single something out, it almost feels like, very hard to do. But I saw Alex Nanau's film Toto and His Sisters some years ago at a film festival where I was a judge. And I didn't know who he was as a filmmaker. Had no idea what this film was about. And it just totally blew me away, as his, current work does as well. And it was talk about what Kirby was talking about, a very powerful verite filmmaking that also felt very complete as a work to me, and has one of the most powerful ends to any documentary I think I've ever seen. So that's one that has kind of stuck with me, that's more recent. I mean, there's plenty of work over the years that sticks with me, but that's one that I immediately kind of thought of when you asked the question.
I'm embarrassed by how little I watch and how much there is to see. My most recent queue, and I'll give a plug, is The Summer of Soul, which is on a documentary about the lost, never before seen footage from the Harlem Cultural Festival, which just was so emotional to watch because the performances are incredible. It's 19-year-old Stevie Wonder, Mavis Staples with Mahalia Jackson, the fifth dimension. And it's corny, but like it's a stage and it's microphones, but people are actually singing and playing instruments and dancing. Like there's no auto-tune. They're just like giving it all. And then the thing that blows me away is that so much of it is showing the audience watching. And it reminded me of Apollo 11 years ago, where my favorite scenes, the thing was incredible, but like was watching the people on top of their Winnebagos and campers waiting to see the rockets take off. And it's just these snapshots from '69 of people and what they wore. And in this case, beautiful, mostly black people who usually when you see in cinema or in television, you see groups of black people, it's in the context of something more gruesome or more, but this was just beauty and music and culture, and it thrilled me on every level. Anyway, that's my plug.
That's interesting. It's amazing that didn't get made because it was so well covered. I mean, it was like, I thought it didn't get made because it was like perhaps there was just kind of a very low production. Somebody came in at the last minute, so it's pretty unfortunate that it wasn't deemed worthy or something. I don't know. It's
What a
kind of
discovery! What a time capsule discovery now.
yeah, wow, yeah, it's incredible. I'll just jump in here. I really loved One Child Nation by Nan Fu, and I actually like all of her work. I mean, one of the things I like about her is the way that, she immerses herself in this very, personal kind of exploration of a subject. At the same time, it's very broad and theoretical. She's able to handle both at the same time. And I don't know. I'm just, and she's very rigorous in that way. I mean, she just, every time she goes into a project, she kind of says, "I'm going to go right to the center of it myself." And so I'm just looking forward to a career, a continuing career from her.
Yeah, great idea.
Yeah, she's great. I mean, again, I've seen so many incredible documentaries, especially in the last year or so. It's just been every year is great. And then, so I continue to be excited by what's coming. I think that I finally watched Honeyland. For some reason, I didn't watch it whatever year it was that it came out. And that was great, right in the middle of the pandemic, to kind of go very far away from both the pandemic, but also, from anything digital, anything. I think though, but in the less documentary, I don't know what this is called, but the How To with John Wilson on HBO has been
that's great.
a really great kind of documentary. I mean, speaking of found footage and putting it together and being reflective on stuff you shot a million years ago and how you've changed and New York has changed. And maybe it's also a love letter to New York. I miss New York. And so I think that that's great and everybody should watch that.
Yeah. Good.
Next question I want to throw to Tom, and this can apply to documentary or reality television as well. What are some of the tropes that might be associated with that are ones that just annoy you?
I hate when people say, "Is reality real?" Because it's sort of this snobby way of thinking that anytime that nothing's edited, that nothing has a point of view, that once you point a camera in a direction, you're making a choice. That when you're editing, you're making a choice. So especially in the work that we do at World of Wonder, we try very hard to represent, I think, like every documentary and filmmaker, like what happened there, and if anything, because we do a show about men wearing lots of makeup, we try for it to be very well lit. I think that's very important, and that and we try to sort of lift up our subjects that way. So I don't that idea that is reality real, and that again, reality is that really broad word that we used to avoid, non-scripted, docu-series and things. But it's I think it's the love that you've sort of put into it, and I hope that shows in what we do.
I can jump in just because I'm reflecting on your question there, Charlie, and I'm sort of stuck in that there's so many different ways one can approach nonfiction film, and very oftentimes filmmakers are restricted for some reason or another based on what type of story it is. Is it archival? Are you following people around? Is it cinema verite? So you have all these different tools at your disposal. And I think it's like maybe sometimes if the technique doesn't match the style of the film or the opportunity there, that might be a little funny. But I mean, in basically all those cases, I feel like you're trusting the judgment of the filmmaker in how they wanted to go capture and tell that story. So I don't even think of it that way. I don't feel like there are tropes that like rub me the wrong way. It's like, did it work for that story or not? And hopefully it did.
That's excellent. We do say that. It's like every sort of subject tells you how to tell it, and sometimes that's being a fly in the wall, and so that's doing a competition elimination show is the way to get the stories out, and to engage people. So I agree with you.
Right.
Yeah, and you oftentimes you have to try all different kinds of things. Again, that's kind of, you're always failing, right? The first one, the second one, the third, So I think that, again, I just really think that that's one of the things I love about things is that, you can be 2/3 of the way, 3/4 of the way through a film and still go, maybe there's a whole new approach to this thing. And I like the fact that you don't know where you're going. Hopefully you do finally at the end, but even that, maybe it's exciting.
Great, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
I would say that this goes back to something that Kirby was kind of saying, and Tom too, which is I think my least favorite question at film festivals, I don't know if this qualifies as an answer to your question, but my least favorite question at film festivals is to what extent did the camera being there change what you got? And I understand where the question comes from, but it seems like everybody always asks that question, right, at every film festival. And I've gotten to the point where I kind of give a catty answer to begin with, where I say, unless you believe in alternative reality, it's impossible to answer that. But the more serious answer for me it's a trope to believe, I guess, that you can make a documentary and not have an effect on the reality that you're filming. That's a trope. And that question comes from that trope, that belief that if it was pure, then somehow this would have happened without you being there. And that is so wrong on so many levels, not just the fact of you capturing a story that would not have been captured, but also the impact it has on the telling and the relationships, like Kirby was saying earlier, that you have with subjects. Even the most purist verite filmmakers have an impact on their subjects, because if there was no film being made, they would be different. The making of the film changed, and I embrace that. I love the fact that the filmmaking process actually, that the subjects get something from this process. We know what we get. We get a film, we get to be on shows like this and talk about them. But the subjects need to also walk away with something tangible. And I think the experience of being in a film for a subject, if it goes well, can be a kind of remarkable experience for them that changes them too.
100% what he said. I don't have anything to add to that. That's very true. And we get asked that question for the last 20 years, that's every question that we get. That's the first one. And it's an interesting question. And I think we all understand where it comes from. On the most cynical end of that spectrum, I think people do wonder, like, well, did you make stuff happen? And you're like, again, no, but you can't. I was there, so yeah, I made that happen, and we do have an effect. We are not flies on walls. We are very big with very big cameras.
Big wins.
And we're really good at the choreography of staying out of people's way. I think the only funny story that I would tell at the Boise State thing is that Boise State had its own little news crew, and so they were kind of new to and they had their tripod and their cameras and their little journalists and everything, and they were constantly getting in people's way and hitting people with cameras, and the tripod was falling over, and they were asking questions. They were very leading and telling people what to say, all of it. And it was just okay, that is that's not going to work. So,
but I want to see the film about that crew, though.
We have all that footage, Steve. It's the long director's cut of this movie. Yeah.
Love that.
Well, to everyone on this panel, thank you so much for joining us. This has been quite a delight. Thank you for joining us on this Meet the Experts panel for documentary and nonfiction programming. And be sure to go to Gold Derby to make your predictions and see if you can outsmart the top prognosticators in Hollywood. Everyone, thank you so much.
Thank you.